Outside a high school, a group of professionals was arranging a magical setup. At Shihai First Academy, more than 100 seniors were ready for a class transfer. They sat attentively while Principal Lu Yun spoke. Lu Yun, a man of few words, wished for each student to reach the heights of someone named Su Qianxing, a former student who became a respected divine holy mage after transferring successfully from the academy. Su Qianxing was now a prominent figure at level 80. Principal Lu often shared his achievements to motivate and lead the students toward their own successes. Lin, who is a student of Shihai First Academy, looked at the nearly finished magical circle, his eyes showing a serious yet eager expression. Having lived in this reality for years, he understood its nature. It was a world fused with game-like elements. During their final year of high school, people underwent class transfers, cleared dungeons, explored hidden realms, joined battles, or slew wilderness monsters. These activities provided experience points to gain levels, master skills, and become stronger. Many ancestors fought and sacrificed against demonic foes so that humanity could carve out a living space, leading to the current way of life. The success rate of class transfers had long reached 100%. The only difference was the quality of the professions. The most popular professions in this world were undoubtedly the combat-oriented classes, followed by support classes, while the lifestyle classes ranked last. However, this was just a rough classification. There were also the legendary level and rare professions, which were extremely rare. Here in the Shihai city, with not a single legendary level profession emerging in the past decade, as a beam of light shot up into the sky, the transfer array circle had been fully enchanted. Lin followed the group, contemplating in his heart what profession he would transfer into. No one could accurately predict what profession they would become. Suddenly, someone tapped Lin on the shoulder. Gao Yang, wearing a smile, approached and asked what profession he wanted to transfer into. Lin glanced at him, shook his head, and didn't answer. Gao Yang continued with a smile. "Come on, tell me. It's okay to share. Let me tell you, I really want to become a knight. Just imagine, with my tall and sturdy appearance, being a knight would surely be imposing, plus I could protect the ladies." Lin didn't like to talk much, despite his excellent academic performance. He had few friends. Many people thought there was something wrong with him, exchanged a few words with him before leaving to talk to someone else. In those brief conversations, there were voices tinged with envy and bitterness. Many people felt that Lin was too aloof and arrogant because of his good grades. Gao Yang smiled and said, "Actually, Lin just simply doesn't like talking." Unfortunately, no one believed this statement either. Anyway, Lin didn't feel the need to provide further explanation. The group arrived in front of the array circle, and Principal Lu walked up to an elderly man with great respect. "Master Zhang, I appreciate your help today," he said. Master Zhang had a warm smile, appearing to be a very amiable old man. He didn't conceal his information, and everyone could see it. Zhang Qiang, level 52, Formation Grandmaster. Lin was slightly surprised to see that he was an Array Grandmaster, and his level was an impressive 52. Array Grandmasters were considered rare support class professions, and were not commonly seen. Moreover, they possessed tremendous power. Soon, Principal Lu Yun brought out a list and started reading off the names of the students. The first student called was Shu Da. He responded and entered the transfer array with a hint of nervousness. As the array roared to life, accompanied by a dazzling light, Zhu Da's class transfer concluded, lifestyle profession, farmer. Zhu Da's face turned slightly pale. He hadn't expected to become a farmer. It was still a decent profession since everyone needed to eat. Right after stepping down from the array, Shu Da's close friends comforted him. The second person hurried into the array. A dazzling light enveloped the scene as he underwent his class transfer, becoming a chef. He was pleased to follow in his father's footsteps. The third, the fourth, One person after another went up for their class transfers, and most of them ended up with lifestyle professions. Master Zhang and Principal Lu Young sighed. So far, not a single rare profession had appeared. Master Zhang stood beside Principal Lu as the architect of the transfer array, and he was well aware of the class transfer situation. Lu called out another name, Jiaxu. She responded promptly before setting off. Jiaxu glanced at Lin, her eyes flashing with a hint of provocation. She and Lin were known as the two geniuses of the high school. However, in terms of academic performance, Lin always outshined Xia Shui, who remained in second place. Xia Shui had always held a grudge deep inside. She refused to accept defeat. Master Zhang, who had been keeping his eyes closed, suddenly opened them and glanced at Xia Shui. This girl is impressive. Master Zhang detected that Xia Shui's spiritual power was more than twice as strong as an average person's, indicating the potential for her to become a mage. The array activated, and a radiant light enveloped the scene. In the midst of the light, two enormous fireballs suddenly rose, bursting like fireworks. Lu exclaimed in excitement, "An anomaly, a rare profession, an elemental mage." The appearance of the anomaly indicated the emergence of a rare profession. Lu's excitement at this moment was overwhelming. Just a moment ago, he had been mentioning rare professions as a mere wishful thinking. Principal Lu and Master Zhang were both delighted. After Xiasui returned, a group of classmates gathered around her, bombarding her with questions. This was a main combat class profession, and moreover, it was a rare class. Lin heard his name and lifted his foot, walking towards the array. Xiaxue watched Lin, her eyes filled with a sense of challenge. Principal Lu glanced at Master Zhang beside him and asked, "How is this child?" Master Zhang calmly replied, "Academic performance and class transfer do not necessarily correlate." You knew this. Lu obviously understood, but he still held on to his expectations. The array activated, erupting in a brilliant light. The once bright sky suddenly darkened, and in the blink of an eye, dark clouds covered the heavens. Chilling winds blew in from all directions, causing the temperature to plummet. Day turned into night as if doomsday had arrived. Lu exclaimed in astonishment, "What is happening?" Master Zhang fixed his gaze on the array and calmly said, "An anomaly, a class transfer anomaly." Lu nearly exclaimed in surprise. Such a massive class transfer anomaly was unheard of. With that, he became agitated. With such a significant anomaly, not having a rare profession would be unacceptable. Xiaxu clenched her fist. This anomaly was much greater than the one before. She felt a sense of unwillingness to admit defeat, but judging solely from the anomaly itself, she couldn't help but acknowledge its significance. Suddenly, a student shouted, "Look, there's a movement within the dark clouds." Everyone looked up. Within the dark clouds, flickers of lightning could be seen. Apart from the lightning, there seemed to be something else. Moreover, a crackling friction sound emanated from the dense clouds, causing discomfort in their ears. Finally, a sharp-eyed student caught sight of what was within the clouds, and he was so frightened that he fell to the ground. The dark clouds were filled with countless skeletons. As his words trailed off, the entire scene within the dark clouds was fully revealed. Thousands upon thousands of skeletons stood densely packed, and the flickering flames were the soul fires within their skulls. They all slightly bowed, paying their respects to their master. One of the soul fires descended from the sky and landed on Lin. Subsequently, all the anomalies vanished in an instant and everything returned to normal. Unique hidden class, Necromancer. It was not just a rare class, it was a hidden class, and it was a uniquely hidden class. This meant that there was only one of this class in the entire world. Unless Lin died, there would never be a second person with the same class. Among the students, there were those who congratulated him, those who were puzzled, those who were jealous, those who were disdainful, and those who were afraid. Despite feeling excitement about his unique and hidden class, Lin showed no outward emotion. He believed that emotions should be kept hidden. "Wait a moment," Master Zhang called out to him as he passed by. Lin turned around and saluted Master Zhang. This was the first time Master Zhang had encountered such a class, and he wanted Lin to demonstrate his skills. After checking his attributes, Lin found that besides the basic attributes and level, he had 2 skills. The first skill was Summon Skeleton Warrior, with 7 levels ranging from Black Iron, Bronze, Silver, Gold, Diamond, Legendary, to Divine. Currently, he could only summon a Black Iron skeleton. The second skill was Soul Flame, which allowed him to burn the souls of his targets with the power depending on his own spiritual strength and level. Knowing that demonstrating the Soul Flame skill would not be appropriate, Lin chose to summon a Skeleton Warrior instead. Activating the skill, a black vortex appeared beside Lin. Then a Skeleton Warrior engulfed in flames of soul fire emerged from the vortex. His spirit energy instantly dropped from 20 points to 10 points, consuming half of it. The Black Iron level Skeleton Warrior had gray bones with numerous cracks all over its body. Even the sword it held was worn and tattered, seemingly salvaged from a heap of junk. The skeleton fighter had equal attributes of 15 in all categories, lacking any additional skills. Its evenly distributed attributes rendered it devoid of specific strengths or weaknesses. It possessed only rudimentary attack capabilities and lacked any distinct skills. Upon the appearance of the skeleton fighter, the students were taken aback and instinctively stepped back, displaying the typical fear people have towards frightening entities. Master Zhang's gentle touch caused a soft glow to emanate from his fingertips upon contact with the skeleton fighter. Instantly, the creature's eyes glowed red, and the flames of its soul flickered intensely. Lin observed that the system recognized the skeleton fighter being targeted and prompted an option for a counterattack. Faced with a 10-second decision window, Lin swiftly recalled information and immediately commanded the skeleton fighter to remain still. This surprised Master Zhang, who was level 52, while Lin was only at level 1. The fact that his summoned creature exhibited hostility towards him was unexpected. However, Master Zhang held high expectations for Lin's future and encouraged him to work hard. The skeleton warrior followed behind Lin, making clicking sounds and accompanied by chilling gusts of wind, adding to its eerie atmosphere. As Lin was returning, many classmates unconsciously distanced themselves from him. Only Gao Yang approached him. He expressed a desire to touch the skeleton warrior, and Lin nodded in approval. Gao Yang gathered his courage and reached out to touch the skeleton warrior. It had a touch similar to steel plates, giving off a cold sensation. It was soon Gao Yang's turn to undergo a class transition. Lin looked at the skeleton warrior and silently thought, "Recall." A vortex appeared in front of him once again, and the skeleton warrior entered the vortex, disappearing from sight. The system indicated that his summoning space had reached 1 out of 10 in capacity. Lin carefully reviewed the summoning space description. It functioned as a storage area for summoned creatures. Any unused summoned creatures could be housed in the summoning space and summoned whenever necessary. Creatures summoned from this space didn't require the consumption of spiritual power. While contemplating his class transition, Lin recollected the vision he experienced during the process, a vision starkly different from others. He witnessed a colossal dragon soaring through the sky, occasionally letting out cries of agony. Abruptly, it descended and thrashed wildly on the ground. Lin witnessed a multitude of skeleton warriors covering the dragon's body, numbering in the thousands. These warriors incessantly wielded their blades, inflicting grievous wounds on the dragon. Despite the dragon's attempts to resist, the onslaught proved relentless and futile. The transition formation erupted in a brilliant light. Gao Yang's class transition was complete. Advanced melee class, sword and shield knight. It turned out that Gao Yang had become a knight, just as he had hoped. Gao Yang excitedly ran back. For a rare moment, Lin showed a hint of a smile and even gave Gao Yang a thumbs up. Gao Yang burst into laughter, patting Lin's shoulder. From now on, we'll tackle dungeons together. I'll stand in front of you. In that case, let me recall the phrase. He tapped his head and said, if someone wants to kill me, he would have to step over your corpse first. Lin was speechless. He couldn't bear this guy anymore and finally spoke up. You got it in reverse. Gao Yang was taken aback and started laughing. You finally spoke up. I deliberately said it in reverse. Didn't you notice? Lin gave Gao Yang a disdainful look. Finally, all the students completed their class transitions. Principal Lu congratulated everyone once again, and tomorrow their newbie dungeon would be open to all students. The details of the newbie leveling dungeon were known to almost everyone. The monsters inside were concentrated between levels 1 and 8. Moreover, their numbers were few, and the difficulty was low. Xia Shui stopped Lin. She wanted to challenge him to see who would achieve better results in the final exam. Lin looked at her with a puzzled expression. He nodded and bypassed Xia Shui. She took it as Lin's acceptance of her challenge. Lin returned home. The house was empty, devoid of any presence. He picked up a photo frame and looked at it. The furnishings in the house were very simple, with hardly any furniture. One photo stood out prominently. The photo featured Lin, a young and beautiful woman who was his sister, and an elderly woman with gray hair who was his grandmother. There was a knock on the door. From outside, Lu Yun stood there with a package. He had brought some supplies for Lin's daily needs. Lin accepted the food and thanked Principal Lu. Over the past year, Lu Yun had been sending food supplies every few days. It was a promise he made to Lin's sister last year. Lin Mohan was admitted to Xiajing Academy as the top scholar in the Shihai city. However, at that time, Lin Mohan didn't want to go because she wanted to stay behind and take care of her younger brother, Lin. Once she went to Xiajing Academy, she wouldn't be able to return for at least 3 years. Principal Lu tried so hard to convey to attend the academy and promised to take care of Lin personally. After waving goodbye to Principal Lu, Lin went on experimenting his new class. He opened his stat window and checked his 2 skills. Suddenly, a sudden anomaly occurred within the system. The system detected Lin awakening as a necromancer and initiated a binding process with the most powerful talent. As a consequence, Lin received a new talent, a comprehensive enhancement that magnified the effects of all his skills by a factor of 5. Additionally, he acquired a passive skill named Damage Transfer, enabling him to redirect all damage inflicted on him to his summoned creatures. Both of these skills can be deemed overpowered. The potency of this talent is so formidable that Lin finds it challenging to articulate in words. Lin activates his skill and summons a black iron-level skeleton. A vortex materializes before him. At first glance, this black iron-level skeleton appears similar to the one he summoned earlier in the afternoon. Its outward appearance hasn't notably changed, akin to the one retrieved from the rubbish heap. However, its attributes have undergone a staggering transformation, elevating from its initial value of 15 to 75.
The following day swiftly arrived, and Lin appeared at the newbie dungeon's entrance. Not only his academy peers, but also students from Shihai City, who had completed class transfers, frequented this place. They were all aware that forming teams ensured an equal distribution of experience, particularly advised for dungeons below level 10. Principal Lu approached and mentioned that, except for Xiaoxue and Lin, all main combat classes needed support roles for the dungeon. When questioned about this exception, Lu explained that Xiaoxue was preparing for Xiajing Academy, and Lin's need for support could be asked. Several support players, mostly girls, dissented. They were fearful of Lin's skeletal warriors and were reluctant to team up with him. Lin conveyed his intention to apply to Xiajing Academy, explicitly stating his disinterest in forming a team. Principal Lu was taken aback by this revelation, as Xiajing Academy required a minimum level of 12 for entry, which Lin had just a week to achieve from his current level, a demanding task. Lin, exuding confidence, entered the dungeon without much ado. Xiao Xue challenged Lin, saying they would compete to see who could level up faster. Lin neither agreed nor refused, remaining non-committal. Xiao Xue huffed and tilted her head back, revealing her slender and graceful neck. "If you don't answer, I'll take it as a yes," she declared. Lin released 4 skeleton warriors and commanded them to find and kill monsters. The 4 skeleton warriors dashed off in different directions. Weaker monsters were quickly slain, and notifications kept appearing as the skeleton warriors continuously found and killed big-eared bunnies. In less than half an hour, Lin reached level 2. He called forth more black iron-grade skeleton warriors and noticed their movements created a map. Spotting some missed monsters, he used his skill Soul Flame to instantly defeat level 2 monsters. Lin reached level 3, summoning more warriors. Even level 5 monsters fell easily to them. He didn't need to lift a finger, simply waiting to level up quickly to level 4. Outside, Principal Lu and Xiaoxu's father discussed Su Qianxing and Lin Mohan, reaching level 5 in the beginner's dungeon. They knew players exited after 12 hours, making higher levels difficult. Xia Dongyang was astonished learning Lin had awakened as a necromancer. In the dungeon, after 7 hours, Lin hadn't met an 8th level monster. His skeleton warriors patrolled within 500 meters, swiftly dispatching any monsters. The terrain changed to a forest. A tree branch whipped Lin, harmlessly transferred to his summoned creatures by his passive skill. A massive level 8 tree stood, not instantly defeated by his warriors. Lin ordered multiple strikes on various trees, swiftly bringing them down. Outside the dungeon, the sky gradually darkened. Suddenly, a brilliant light emanated from the entrance of the dungeon, and everyone looked up simultaneously. Lin emerged from the light. Principal Lu asked how he managed to come out, and Lin replied softly, "I beat the dungeon." Principal Lu was amazed when he learned that Lin reached level 7 in just 10 hours. Lin didn't explain much but applied to go to West Sea City's outskirts. This surprised Principal Lu so much that he was momentarily speechless. Lin had to get his attention by waving his hand in front of his eyes. Principal Lu snapped out of his daze and instructed Lin to take a rest. Principal Lu returned to his desk, and the other principals looked at him curiously. After taking a few sips of tea, Principal Lu revealed that Lin had completed the newbie dungeon. Everyone was astonished and could hardly believe it. Lin continued to replenish his spiritual energy through meditation. By now, he had summoned a total of 24 skeleton warriors, but his summoning space still had 70 vacant slots. After a while, the 12-hour time limit was up, and the students who had entered the dungeon were teleported out one by one. Many of them wore expressions of exhaustion, but even more were filled with excitement. Xiao Xue emerged from the dungeon as well, having reached level 5. After exiting the dungeon, Xiao Xue couldn't find Lin. At first, she scanned the surroundings with her beautiful eyes, and finally spotted him in the distance, deep in meditation. Her eyes widened, and she stood frozen in place, seemingly shocked by the revelation that Lin had reached level 7. As Xiaoxu's father, Xia Dongyang, waved his hand and got on the car with Xiaoxu, her eyes couldn't help but glance towards Lin. Xiaoxu's father noticed her reaction and realized what she was thinking. Xiaoxu was determined. Her father informed her that Lin finished the dungeon in 10 hours and defeated all the level 8 monsters. On the bus, Gaoyang hugged Lin tightly and asked how he managed to reach level 7, pleading to join him in leveling up next time, to which Lin winked and said, "Sure, maybe later." The next morning, Gaoyang couldn't find Lin at the school gate. He then learned that Lin had gone to the outskirts of Shihai City. It dawned on Gaoyang that he had been bailed by Lin, which explained why he had agreed so quickly the day before. At the Imperial Exchange District, Lin went through the identity verification process. Lin had access to the exchange, albeit with a low-level permission of only level 1. He checked the missions available with basic trading and gathering missions, and found one that involved clearing a level 14 dungeon. Lin undergoes a class transfer ritual along with his high school classmates, obtaining the extremely rare and powerful necromancer profession. He gains skills to summon undead warriors and burn enemy souls. Lin easily defeats monsters and reaches level 7 in the beginner dungeon in just 10 hours, astonishing his principal and peers. He travels to the Imperial Exchange District to take on higher-level missions, determined to rapidly gain power and entry to the prestigious Xiajing Academy like his sister. The dungeon difficulty was categorized as normal, nightmare, and hell. This particular mission required nightmare level or higher completion. Lin shook his head. He was still too weak at the moment. The city gate guard held the exit permit provided by Lin and verified his information. Although the guards were puzzled by how a level 7 student was allowed to leave the city, the exit permit was genuine. The city gate guard quickly approved the verification. The guard advised Lin to stay safe and cautious as he walked out of the city gate. A cold wind blew against him, and the sky immediately darkened, creating a heavy atmosphere. Inside and outside, the city felt like two different worlds. Lin sensed the presence of goblins behind him and summoned his skeletal soldiers to attack the level 10 goblin. Compared to his level 7 skeleton warriors, this goblin was too weak. Lin felt excited as he summoned all of his skeleton warriors and charged towards the large goblin army. He clenched his fists, feeling a surge of anticipation. At this rate, reaching level 15 before the major exam shouldn't be a problem. He then recalled how his sister had already reached level 16 before her own major exam, and he wondered how she had achieved such progress. He couldn't wait to see his sister. After a while, his level increased to 10, and his talents and skills were both upgraded. He could now summon bronze-level skeleton warriors with his greatly increased spiritual energy. Lin eagerly summoned a bronze-level skeleton warrior. The bronze-level skeleton warrior no longer had the gray color, but instead had a pale greenish-white hue. The weapon in its hand had transformed into an axe. Its base attributes were astonishingly high, reaching 1500. Moreover, it possessed a skill called Rampage Strike, which dealt double damage to the target and had a cooldown of 10 minutes. As Lin was about to continue summoning bronze-level skeleton warriors, the sound of a breaking wind echoed, followed by several arrows flying past him. Multiple arrows flew right in front of him, and one of them struck him. His passive skill automatically redirected all the damage to the skeleton warrior, so Lin himself was unharmed. A figure dressed in black emerged from the forest, running at high speed with impressive agility. She noticed Lin and swiftly changed direction, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Judging by her attire, Lin could roughly determine her profession as an assassin. Then two persons appeared. They were an archer and a mage. Unable to catch the girl, they asked Lin where the person had gone. Instead of answering, Lin spoke coldly. "You shot me with an arrow. Apologize." The archer looked at the arrow on the ground, realizing what had happened, and also apologized. Although puzzled as to why the arrow didn't cause any harm, the mage's expression grew gloomy, clearly unhappy about the escape. He turned his gaze to the skeleton warriors, his eyes filled with disgust, and slowly raised his staff. However, the archer suddenly pulled the mage back and walked the other way. Upon seeing the retreating figures, Lin remarked that these two individuals couldn't be too high-leveled, probably around level 20 at most. Lin contemplated the possibility of resorting to killing if he were attacked. The bronze-level skeleton warriors effortlessly defeated the monsters around, resembling someone mowing a lawn. However, Lin's progress in leveling started to slow down. Nightfall approached, leaving Lin still needing 30% more experience to reach level 11. He didn't plan to return as time was limited, and he couldn't waste it on travel. His determination to join Xiajing Academy drove him to work harder than anyone else. Setting up a campfire in the forest, Lin ate while lost in thought. He couldn't understand how his sister had reached level 16. There was something he overlooked. As he recalled his sister's return from the western outskirts, injured all over, Lin started connecting the dots. He merged his school knowledge with the outskirts information and realized something. The Western Sea Mine Dungeon. Did his sister team up with others to tackle that dangerous dungeon? Despite being a nightmare level, this revelation fueled Lin's curiosity. He vowed to investigate the Western Sea Mine Dungeon once he became stronger and reached a higher level. He believed it held the key to understanding his sister's rapid progress. Feeling assured of his theory, Lin clenched his fist. The skeleton warriors lurked in the night as Lin began meditating. Suddenly, one of them alerted him, breaking his concentration. A figure emerged, the same black-clad person who had escaped earlier that afternoon. The girl asked if there was any food available, and Lin handed her a sweet potato. The girl didn't show any signs of disdain and eagerly devoured the food, revealing her face by removing her mask. She began to thank him, but suddenly broke into a violent cowing fit. While still cugging, she continued to talk to Lin, who handed her a bottle of water. After she finally managed to speak clearly, she asked for his name. However, when Lin didn't answer, she suggested they both use a detection spell on each other. Lin thought for a moment and agreed. They both activated a detection spell at the same time, their fingertips glowing faintly as they cast the spell on each other. Surprisingly, the spell didn't work for Lin, and he couldn't gather any information about the girl. The girl giggled suddenly, looking triumphant. Even though it was her first time encountering a necromancer like Lin, she now knew his name and level. She began speaking rapidly. Lin, staying calm, asked why the girl was so pleased. He wanted to know her reason for being excited. Looking directly at Lin, the girl smiled and revealed a badge-like item, a screening badge. She explained, "Wearing this badge, anyone whose level isn't more than 10 levels higher than yours won't be detected by spells." She put away her badge, and Lin nodded before trying the detection spell again. This time, it worked. Level 19, Shadow Assassin. A gentle breeze passed by, and Ning Yi's smile disappeared instantly. Lin also turned to a specific direction. Besides the archer and mage they had met earlier, there was now a knight holding a giant shield. The three surrounded them from different sides. Just as the girl was about to run away, an arrow shot from the darkness. Ning Yi swiftly dodged to the side. The arrow exploded suddenly, splitting into two streaks of light that landed on Lin and Ning Yi. These weren't ordinary arrows, they were marker arrows. Red marks appeared above both Lin and Ning Yi's heads. The sound of cold laughter filled the air as the mage they had encountered before emerged from the forest. They considered Lin as part of the girl's group. The girl attempted to explain that Lin had nothing to do with her, but the three individuals clearly didn't believe her. The archer on the tree chuckled and decided to kill both of them so no one would know about their possession of intermediate skill scrolls. Ningye whispered to Lin, "I'll keep them busy. You should go on your own." Lin looked at her and asked, "What about you?" The girl didn't want Lin to get into danger. As a shadow assassin, she might have escaped before, but being marked by the archer's arrow now rendered her stealth ability useless, making it hard for her to flee. The mage raised his staff, getting ready to attack. Suddenly the staff glowed brightly, and a huge ball of light rose into the sky, lighting up the surroundings brightly. Ningyi's hand sparkled, and a blue dagger appeared as she tensed up. The archer perched in the tree had his bow fully drawn, prepared to shoot. The knight stood firm with his shield, ready to charge. The mage's staff gleamed brightly. In that moment, Lin raised his finger slightly, summoning a skeleton warrior in front of him. The mage showed a mix of disdain and disgust. He shouted, conjuring a massive fireball, around a meter in diameter, bursting into flames and hurtling towards them. Ningyi's expression changed, and she pulled Lin back. However, while they were retreating, Ningyi felt a sudden heaviness in her body, and their speed drastically slowed down. An invisible thread extended from the mage's staff, entangling her feet. The archer also took action. An arrow was shot, but halfway through its trajectory, it split into three. Meanwhile, the knight launched his charge, rushing towards the two of them at an astonishing speed. The girl suddenly exerted force and pushed Lin away, moving him out of the range of the attack. At that moment, two skeleton warriors appeared on either side of Ningyi. The knight collided with the skeleton warriors, but while the skeleton warriors remained motionless, the knight was sent flying backward. The archer's triple shot landed on the skeleton warriors, creating metallic impact sounds amidst the flames. The skeleton warriors slowly emerged, radiating a pale blue glow, showing no signs of injury. With a single thought, the skeletal warrior sprang into action with lightning speed. The mage's face turned pale, his staff trembling in his hand. He quickly conjured a glowing energy shield around himself, the mage's signature defensive skill. Unlike agile archers, mages were not known for speed or dexterity. Moreover, he was now completely surrounded by the skeletal warriors, leaving no room for escape. As one skeletal warrior raised its blade, the mage's energy shield warped and contorted violently. The mage's expression changed drastically, realizing one strike could shatter his shield. He couldn't believe these skeletons possessed such terrifying power. What attributes did they have? He had no time to contemplate as a second warrior's blade descended, shattering the energy shield on impact, dispersing it into countless twinkling stars. In desperation, the mage unleashed a resistant flame ring skill. A massive ring of fire erupted outwards, pushing back several nearby skeletons over 10 meters with its force. But before the mage could even celebrate, darkness enveloped his vision. 2 skeletons had already leapt above, blades glinting. With no chance to use any more skills, the mage's head was severed in an instant. In just 2 seconds, the mage met his demise. The archer trying to evade the warriors wasn't faring well either. Having witnessed the mage's gruesome death firsthand, fear flooded his mind. More agile than the mage, he repeatedly used evasive maneuvers to break free from the encircling skeletons. But despite his efforts, escape proved impossible. The warriors closed in step by step, restricting his space more and more. He didn't understand how these bony warriors could move so swiftly. Unlike the other 2, only the knight seemed able to hold his ground. His body emitting a glowing radiance, he repeatedly activated a charging skill, racing towards open spaces. This glowing layer securely protected him even when the skeletons struck, their blades unable to inflict any harm. He knew this was a limitless defense skill, one that few knights could master. Recalling his knowledge, it was one of the core knight abilities. Once activated, it granted immense defense for a short period. Relying on his limitless defense, the knight desperately fled as a pain scream echoed behind him. The archer had met his demise too. With both mage and archer dead, the knight was thoroughly frightened. How could these skeleton warriors be so terrifying? If he had known, he would never have come. This mediocre skill scroll wasn't worth losing his life over. Lin had no intention of letting him escape. There was no turning back now. Lin would ensure a clean kill. One skeleton warrior's blade glowed red as it activated the Rampage Strike skill, dealing double its normal damage. The knight was shocked that a mere undead would use such skills. The powerful red sword struck, instantly disabling the knight's protective limitless defense spell. More swift blows followed, rapidly wearing down the spell's duration. Moreover, more warriors surrounded the knight, cutting off any chance of escape. Overwhelmed, a sense of hopelessness washed over him. After a dozen merciless seconds, the unwilling knight was struck down. Lin recalled his sister's advice. Either don't act, or act decisively without hesitation. That was exactly how he commanded his skeleton force, decisively ending the battle in just 20 seconds, without moving an inch himself. He simply directed his skeleton army to kill all 3 enemies. The warriors returned, carrying items they had picked up. When someone died, their storage space contents would drop. Neatly arranged in front of Lin were 4 bronze-tier weapons and equipment snatched from the bodies. A staff, bow, shield, and sword. Ning Yi informed Lin these were obtained from the Carmen Orc Legion's dungeon. Puzzled, Lin asked about it since he had never heard of that dungeon before. Noticing his confusion, Ning Yi explained. The Carmen Orc Legion dungeon is a level 20 dungeon located outside Zhaohai City. She added that the 4 bronze pieces would be useless to Lin, but sellable for some decent money. Without hesitation, Lin collected them along with some other items like furs, bones, and plants, saying as long as there's value, it's worth taking. The last item was a valuable 10,000 gold beginner skill scroll. Unsure whether to use or sell it, Lin held the scroll pondering as Ningyi noticed his indecision. To her, 10,000 gold was a pittance for a beginner scroll. When Lin asked how to use it, chuckling Ningyi claimed he just had to hold it and yell, "Use." Lin examined the mischievous girl, realizing she had tried to prank him. Though inexperienced with scrolls, Lin wasn't foolish enough to believe their magic hinged merely on the volume of his voice. There was more to it than that. Calmly, Lin attempted to unlock the scroll's power using his own spiritual energy rather than shouting commands at it. Silently, Lin worked to channel his energy into the scroll. Meanwhile, Ningyi watched him expectantly, still waiting for him to bellow, "Use." But to her surprise and dismay, without a sound, the scroll suddenly erupted with brilliant light, enveloping Lin's body. He had discovered the true activation method on his own, rather than falling for her little joke. In the glowing sphere of light, a notification appeared before Lin. Acquired skill, Corpse Explosion. The macabre but powerful new skill could detonate corpses to damage nearby enemies. Corpse Explosion is currently at level 1. At first glance, the skill description may not seem outstanding. The range is only 1 meter. But Lin saw something different in it. This is an AoE skill. If he were to face thousands of enemies, relying on the skeleton warriors to defeat them one by one would be too slow. It would take too much time. However, with this skill, all he needs to do is kill one enemy. Then he can detonate the corpse, causing damage to the enemies within the skill's range. As more enemies are killed and more corpses are formed, he can continue to detonate the corpses one after another. Ningye blinked her big eyes, her face filled with curiosity, and asked if Lin had gotten a new skill. Lin nodded. Lin didn't blame Ningyi for trying to prank him earlier. Ningyi smiled happily, complimenting Lin's voice and hoped he could talk more often. Lin looked at her. This woman seemed different from the girls in his school. She was lively and playful. Your voice sounds nice too, Lin rarely complimented others. Ning Yi appeared delighted and took out a box, placing it directly into Lin's hands. It was an intermediate skill scroll. In the exchange market, the price of an intermediate skill scroll could reach up to 1 million gold coins, 100 times the price of a beginner skill scroll. Ning Yi had mentioned that the people chasing her were after this scroll. How could she just give it away like that? Ning Yi sat down by the campfire and extended her hands to warm them up. With the people who were chasing her now taken care of, Ningyi felt a wave of relaxation wash over her. She had stumbled upon a stroke of luck inside the Carmen Orc Legion's camp. She found a chest that appeared randomly, by chance. Ningyi had come across it and obtained this intermediate skill scroll. Unfortunately, those few individuals had spotted her with it, leading to her being hunted down. Lin looked at Ningyi and waited for her to finish speaking before softly saying, "You almost died just now." Ningyi smiled and explained that if she received a fatal injury, she would be automatically teleported away, but she still feared pain. Well, Lin realized he had been unnecessarily worried. The girl was not an ordinary girl. She had more than enough artifacts to keep her safe, so she couldn't die. Ningyi reached out her hand and asked if there was any food left. Lin took out several steamed buns which he obtained from the earlier battle, totaling more than 10. Ningyi shook her head, indicating that she didn't want anything from those people. Lin chuckled and exchanged the buns for sweet potatoes. Ningyi happily took the sweet potato and started eating it. Watching Ningyi savoring the food, it seemed truly delicious. Lin continued her questioning, and Lin answered that he intended to go to Xinjiang Academy. In her eyes, with Lin's abilities, he would have no problem passing any academy entrance exams. Suddenly, Ningyi thought of something and told Lin that after he arrived at Xinjiang Academy, he must challenge the Divine Tower and aim for the highest floor possible. The rewards for the first-time challenge would be doubled, and it would earn him a substantial amount of points in the academy. Points were more valuable than gold, it seemed. Ningyi seemed to be quite knowledgeable about Xinjiang Academy and passionately explained its details to Lin. As she spoke, Lin's mind started to form a rough image of Xinjiang Academy. 99% of the time it was Ningyi doing the talking, and Lin simply listened, occasionally responding with a sentence or two. Eventually, Ningyi's voice faded away and she fell asleep. Lin removed his coat and offered it to Ningyi as a makeshift blanket, while he himself began to meditate. The next day, sunlight poured in. Lin's spiritual energy was fully replenished as he woke up from his meditation. Ningyi blinked her big eyes and looked at him with a cheerful smile. She reached out her hand asking for the sweet potato. Lin directly handed her a piece of sweet potato, but Ningyi felt it wasn't enough, so Lin took out another piece. Almost all of the 20-something sweet potatoes he had brought with him were given to Ningyi, and he didn't keep a single one for himself. Lin waved his hand and said, "There really are none left." "All right, I'll believe you have no more potatoes left," Ningyi said with a smile. Happily munching on her sweet potato, she bid Lin farewell, expressing her hope to adventure with him again after he became stronger. "Hurry and level up so you can take me along on a journey," she told him cheerfully. Ningyi departed swiftly, taking the last of the sweet potatoes and using Lin's coat as a makeshift blanket. Watching her leave, Lin softly muttered to himself, "I'll bring you along on adventures soon." Alone now, Lin noticed the forest air smelled faintly of blood. Gazing at 3 fresh corpses lying nearby, he remembered the new power he had acquired. Silently preparing himself, Lin walked over to the lifeless bodies to test his recently learned skill, corpse explosion. Kneeling by the first corpse, Lin unleashed the skill. Instantly, the body erupted with a thunderous blast, blowing surrounding trees to splinters. A crater several meters deep now yawned where the corpse had laid just a moment before. Lin was pleasantly surprised by the explosion's substantial power and wide 360-degree radius. After detonating the mage's corpse, Lin experimented on the other bodies, creating even larger blasts than the first. Eager to continue honing his new powers, Lin considered his next destination, the Western Sea Mine. After meditating to restore his spiritual energy reserves, Lin also summoned 4 additional skeleton warriors. Having now reached level 10 proficiency, his summoned skeleton skill transformed the warriors from black iron to sturdier bronze-class undead. However, the heightened skill also demanded more energy, now requiring 70 spiritual power to summon each skeleton soldier. He only has 300, then the summoning space 48 out of 100, and they're all skeleton warriors. He mentions there's no need to rush, and sooner or later, the summoning space will become full. As Lin got closer to the Western Sea Mine dungeon, he started to see people gathering around. The monsters on the way to the dungeon were mostly cleared out. Soon Lin caught sight of the entrance to the dungeon. It was a whirlpool similar to a newbie dungeon, but much larger. The whirlpool seemed to be emitting a constant aura of bloodlust. At the entrance of the dungeon, many people were waving flags and shouting, searching for team members. Several people were also gathered in front of the dungeon entrance, seemingly engaged in discussion and planning. Lin approached the entrance of the dungeon with a single skeleton warrior. He had kept the other skeleton warriors hidden, their bone friction making a sound that sent shivers down one's spine. Many people instinctively stepped back, creating a pathway for Lin. Arriving at the entrance of the dungeon, Lin checked the dungeon information. This was the real deal. Not a newbie dungeon designed for leveling up newcomers. The Mine Dungeon had 2 difficulty levels, offering normal and nightmare difficulties with no hell difficulty available. Even in normal difficulty, the monsters were already elite creatures, several times stronger than those outside. The nightmare difficulty featured even stronger elite monsters, with an even higher level of difficulty. Typically, normal difficulty required a 3-person team consisting of a tank, a damage dealer, and a support. The nightmare difficulty required a 5-person team with dual support and dual damage dealers. From this one could infer the difference in difficulty. The skeleton warrior stood silently beside Lin, showing no signs of movement. Finally, someone mustered the courage to use a detection spell, and it landed on both Lin and the skeleton warrior. A red light suddenly emanated from the hollow eye sockets of the skeleton warrior directed towards the person who cast the detection spell. This startled the person, and the detection spell yielded no results, providing no information. Lin was wearing the shielding emblem given by Ning Yi. He didn't order the skeleton warrior to take action. It was just a detection spell, nothing serious. It seemed that everyone realized Lin was not an ordinary person and started inviting him to join their teams. However, Lin declined. After reviewing the dungeon information, he chose the nightmare difficulty. Lin was teleported into the dungeon. Many people were shocked to see him entering the dungeon alone. They couldn't believe that someone would dare to enter a dungeon on their own. Some people approached the person who had used the detection spell earlier, asking for details. The person seemed slightly embarrassed and said he didn't see any information. Outside the dungeon, many people wore expressions of curiosity, as there had been numerous cases where overconfident individuals attempted to solo dungeons and ended up dying inside. The Western Sea Mine dungeon lived up to its name, with the terrain inside resembling an actual mine. The dungeon was filled with a heavy oppressive atmosphere accompanied by a strong stench of blood. Standing within a safe zone, Lin knew that venturing outside would result in immediate attacks. Lin cast a detection spell, revealing the true nature of the elite goblin monster. Its attributes were several times higher than those of ordinary creatures. A level 14 goblin with 800 strength, spirit 200, and constitution 1000 with a stun attack. Even a level 14 knight class profession wouldn't come close to matching half of its prowess. Without proper teamwork and coordination, defeating a nightmare-level dungeon would be a formidable challenge. Yet when compared to Lin's skeleton warriors, the difference in attributes was still vast. Lin summoned the skeleton warriors from the summoning space, and in an instant the room was filled with an army of them. Afterward, he stepped out of the safe zone, officially embarking on the journey through the dungeon. The goblin guard roared in excitement and charged at Lin, only to be met with the skeleton warrior's large axes. It was quickly dispatched with a few strikes, and Lin received a notification. You have slain a level 14 goblin guard and gained 200 experience. A tinge of excitement flashed through Lin's mind. The experience gained was about 10 times higher than that of monsters at the same level. Killing a single monster here was equivalent to killing 10 outside. Lin felt that he had found the right direction and immediately issued a command. The skeleton warriors swiftly rushed into the dungeon corridor with a clattering sound, like an unstoppable army. They slaughtered their way through, and messages kept appearing. The screen was filled with rapid notifications, not only gaining experience, but also obtaining numerous items and materials. Experience began to increase rapidly, and the number of materials kept growing. A detailed map of the dungeon quickly formed in Lin's mind. The mine dungeon was exactly as its name suggested, a mine inside. There were many passages interconnected in various directions. Just 5 minutes after entering the dungeon, a radiant light of leveling up appeared on Lin. He reached level 11, and upon leveling up, his spirit was fully restored. Lin immediately summoned 4 more skeleton warriors. He checked his own attributes and noticed that the increase in basic attributes had become more significant, with each level granting a boost of 20 attribute points, instead of the previous 10. His spirit had also increased by 100 points. Lin understood that as his level increased, the subsequent attribute boosts would become even greater. This realization came to him after reviewing his attributes. The 4 attributes of the skeleton warriors had reached a terrifying 1,700. And this overall change was within his expectations. However, the recently acquired corpse explosion skill remained at level 1 without any changes. Lin felt puzzled as to why the soul flame and summoned skeleton warrior skills had both improved, but the corpse explosion skill remained the same. He couldn't understand why. If Ning Yi were here, perhaps she would know. Lin thought of Ning Yi, the adorable girl who loved pranks and could talk endlessly. Her knowledge surpassed his own by a considerable margin. Setting aside the doubts in his mind for now, he continued moving deeper into the dungeon. Suddenly, a massive creature blocked the path. A giant wolf king appeared before Lin. The detection spell revealed it to be the Mine Wolf King, an elite boss with surprisingly high attributes. Lin encountered a boss-level monster for the first time, and it was an elite boss at that. Surprisingly, its 4 attributes were even higher than those of a skeleton warrior. Such a degree of strength was expected in a nightmare difficulty dungeon. The crimson eyes of the Wolf King locked onto Lin, emanating a bloodthirsty aura. However, in the end, it was just a wolf. Lin gave the command to attack, and the skeleton warriors swiftly charged towards the Mine Wolf King. The Mine Wolf King let out a fierce roar, unleashing its skills. A powerful shockwave erupted from its mouth. The leading skeleton warrior was sent flying by the impact. The remaining skeleton warriors, who were unaffected by the shockwave, used their skills, delivering rampage strikes. The skeleton warriors who hadn't been knocked back had already reached the Mine Wolf King and began slashing at it with their glowing red blades. The Wolf King howled in agony. Many skeleton warriors leaped high into the air, landing directly on the Wolf King's body and activating their skills with red glows. This scene closely resembled what Lin had witnessed during the day of his class transition. The skeleton warriors had also slain the mighty dragon in such a manner. The Mining Wolf King went into a frenzy, rolling and repeatedly crashing its massive body against the rocky walls of the mine, attempting to shake off the skeleton warriors clinging to it. It unleashed its roar skill once again, sending the surrounding skeleton warriors flying. This time, it used all its strength, maximizing the impact of the knockback effect. Suddenly, the Mine Wolf King turned around and limped towards the passage. Lin was slightly taken aback as he hadn't expected the dungeon boss to flee. The Mine Wolf King ran into the passage, howling all the way. Something seemed off about the situation. Feeling that something was amiss, Lin didn't order the skeleton warriors to pursue. Instead, he had them retreat to his side. The iron doors on both sides of the passage swung open amidst the Mine Wolf King's howls, and bloodthirsty wolves emerged from behind the doors. Under the detection spell, the attributes of these wolves were revealed. Level 14 Blood Wolves with 600 Strength, 600 Agility, 200 Spirit, and 1000 Health. Although the individual attributes of the Blood Wolves were not particularly strong, their sheer numbers, totaling at least 100, were enough to send chills down one's spine. However, Lin did not panic in the face of the wolf pack swarming towards him. Though numerous, their power paled in comparison to his skeleton warriors. With minimal effort, a skeleton warrior slashed through one of the wolves, rewarding Lin with more experience points and materials. A faint smile crossed Lin's lips as he prepared to unleash his special attack, Corpse Explosion. The deafening blast detonated the bodies of the wolves, bits of gore scattering across the mine tunnels. The extreme amplified force of the lethal attack far exceeded what they could withstand. In but a moment, notifications flooded Lin's vision. His experience bar erupted from 32% full to 72% in the blink of an eye. At this point, the hulking Wolf King limped back in stark terror at the carnage before it. Conveniently, several wolf corpses lay near the petrified king's feet. Meeting its gaze coldly, Lin ignited another round of corpse explosions. 3 consecutive blasts engulfed the hapless corpses and the Wolf King alike. Its tortured howls were cut short as its hulking body slammed motionless to the hard mine floor. From felling the king, Lin harvested handsome rewards, 15,000 XP and rare wolf materials. He pressed on through the snaking mine tunnels, soon running into more goblin-like creatures. But to his skeleton army gushing forth, these so-called enhanced monsters were helpless against the tidal wave of undead warriors. The legion of skeletal soldiers flooded through the passages, effortlessly felling one enemy after another. Though mighty themselves, these elite foes provided Lin substantial XP and valuable materials. Lin undergoes a ritual to determine his profession, obtaining the extremely rare Necromancer class. He gains the abilities to summon powerful skeleton warriors and detonate corpses to damage enemies. Lin enters a difficult mine dungeon alone, and easily defeats the enemies and bosses within using his army of skeletons and explosive corpse skill. He rapidly gains levels from the high experience rewards. Lin aims to continue leveling up quickly so he can enroll in the prestigious Xiejing Academy, like his sister, and be reunited with her. He realizes soloing difficult dungeons will allow him to power level at a remarkable pace. The colossal final adversary appeared to be dormant within the expansive heart of the mine. After invoking a detection spell, Lin finally unveiled the foe's true identity, the Goblin King, an immensely powerful boss at level 16. The spell uncovered its astonishing strength and health, totaling over 3,000 points, accompanied by 3 deadly combat skills. Despite Lin's formidable skeleton warriors, this formidable beast seemed superior on paper. The casting awakened the Goblin King, who let out a bone-chilling roar and fixed its malevolent gaze on Lin. Holding a viciously sharpened meat cleaver akin to its massive stature, the king charged through the dense air straight at him. As the merciless cleaver descended, its sharp edge created an equally terrifying gust. Despite Lin's attempts to dodge, the strike landed. Responding with his damage transfer ability, Lin winced as he felt his warriors suffer. Some skeletons displayed hairline fractures from sharing the injury. More concerning, 2 disintegrated on the spot, unable to withstand the redirected damage. Quickly ordering the remaining soldiers to shield him, Lin analyzed the situation. He realized that the severe personal damage he initially endured was amplified due to his weaker base attributes before being transferred in full. Lin's comparatively fragile defenses meant the Goblin King's monstrous strength caused nearly fatal damage to his forces. Lin swiftly grasped that, paradoxically, despite the skeleton's strength, he remained their Achilles heel, their only vulnerability. If a clever enemy bypassed his warriors to target him directly, his powerful legions could become useless. The transfer ability had limits and didn't provide foolproof protection. Acknowledging this newfound vulnerability, Lin summoned more skeletal reinforcements to counter the rampaging Goblin King. The Goblin King used the Repel skill. The Goblin King's body emitted a dazzling radiance, and he suddenly leaped into the air before landing heavily on the ground with a resounding boom. All the skeletal warriors surrounding him were blasted away. Even the skeletal warriors on the ground were pushed back by the shockwave. Following that, the Goblin King's eyes also emitted a radiant red light as he opened his large mouth and spewed forth flames. The flames engulfed the skeletal warriors, scorching them. Lin sensed that the HP of the skeletal warriors in the front was rapidly fading, on the verge of approaching the brink of death. A thought flashed through his mind, and the 4 skeletal warriors were immediately retracted into the summoning space. The Goblin King continued spewing flames, preventing the skeletal warriors from approaching. "I must interrupt his skill," Lin muttered as a ball of purple flame appeared in the palm of his hand. Soul Flame. The flames silently and effortlessly landed on the head of the Goblin King. The Goblin King immediately let out a deafening scream, and his skill was abruptly halted and interrupted. The Soul Flame disregarded defenses and directly inflicted spirit damage. The skeletal warriors swiftly gathered around, relentlessly launching their attacks. Lin continued using the Soul Flame to assault the Goblin King, preventing it from using its skills effectively. After 1 minute, the Goblin King fell to the ground, wearing an expression of unwillingness. Soloing a nightmare-level dungeon took just over an hour, but it granted him more than 1 level of experience. Lin examined his rewards. Goblin King's Dagger, Bronze Grade. Strength, plus 110. Agility, plus 10. 3% increase in Assassin-type skill power. Robe of Knowledge, Bronze Grade. Armor, Spirit, plus 110. Health, plus 110. 5% reduction in cooldown time for mage skills. The dagger had no use for Lin, so he stowed it away to sell later. Lin immediately changed into the Robe of Knowledge, increasing his spirit and health by 10 points each. In addition to the equipment, there was the Goblin King's Crystal Core. The Goblin King's Crystal Core was larger than those of lower-level monster cores and had a more captivating appearance. It glowed a vibrant red resembling a ruby. Holding it in his hand, Lin could feel a warm sensation emanating from it. By taking the core back to the trading post, he could exchange it for 10,000 gold coins. After leveling up, Lin's spiritual power was completely restored. He immediately summoned 4 more skeletal warriors. The skill to summon skeletal warriors had also reached level 12, and the total number of summoned warriors had increased to 60. With a cheerful demeanor, Lin strolled toward the dungeon exit. He suddenly reappeared at the entrance, immediately drawing everyone's attention. Onlookers were surprised to see him emerge unharmed, some noting the Robe of Knowledge draped over him. Unfazed by the chatter around, Lin focused on the fact that the dungeon had entered its cooldown phase, requiring a 12-hour wait before re-entry. Having already undergone 1 dungeon run, he had no interest in battling low-level monsters anymore. The experience gained from slaying a dozen creatures pallid in comparison to that earned from defeating a single dungeon foe. Finding a secluded spot, Lin sat down with a loyal skeletal warrior faithfully guarding him. This particular dungeon run held significant meaning for him as it exposed his weaknesses and highlighted the potency of his skills. He understood that when used effectively, Corpse Explosion held unrivaled area of effect power. Soul Flame proved capable of interrupting enemy skills and inflicting formidable spirit damage that bypassed defenses, challenging even nightmare-level bosses. Anticipating the end of the cooldown period, Lin concluded his meditation as night descended, his spiritual energy nearly replenished. Outside the dungeon entrance, seasoned adventurers had set up numerous bonfires and gathered around, cooking meat that filled the air with an enticing aroma. Unlike these prepared individuals, Lin had only brought sweet potatoes and found himself hungry, having given them all to Ning Yiyi. Recalling Ning Yiyi's playful and endearing nature, Lin smiled faintly and settled for some steamed buns to appease his hunger. As he rose, Lin noticed a crowd at the dungeon entrance, divided into 2 groups engaged in a standoff. One faction, dressed uniformly and armed, blocked entry to the dungeon, claiming it was in wait for their young guild leader to complete a mission. This arrogant stance irked many, causing protests among those eager to enter, including the professionals who had been outside the dungeon initially. Amidst the chaos, a mage representing the Dynasty Guild boldly declared the prohibition, asserting their leader's ongoing mission as the reason for the blockade. The professionals voiced their protests, but nobody dared to make a move, mainly because the Dynasty Guild was incredibly powerful, and they didn't want to provoke them too much. Suddenly, the mage from the Dynasty Guild took action, launching a fireball towards one of the protesters, killing him instantly. The onlookers were in a state of panic. They couldn't believe they would just kill someone, while the leading mage simply sneered. He just killed a freelance professional, taunting the crowd. If they have the guts, they can find their revenge in the Dynasty Guild. Lin was filled with questions. He approached a nearby professional and asked what was going on. The professional explained that the Dynasty Guild needed the Goblin King's crystal core, which had a low drop rate and could only be obtained in nightmare-level dungeons. Furthermore, it only dropped once every 100 days. The task listed on the trading post was actually posted by the Dynasty Guild, but nobody had been able to complete it. Also, it was quite ridiculous considering the value of the Goblin King's crystal core was at least 30,000 gold coins. The guild offered to buy it for only 10,000, so who would sell it to them? What a coincidence. The Goblin King's crystal core was in his storage space. The Dynasty Guild would undoubtedly return empty-handed. Originally, Lin had considered selling the Goblin King's crystal core in a couple of days when he returned, but now hearing what the person had said, it was clear that the crystal core was anything but ordinary. Lin then asked how to use the crystal core, and the professional explained that the Goblin King's crystal core could be forged by a blacksmith into the Goblin King's ring. The Goblin King's ring provided a +10 boost to all attributes and increased the level of all skills by 1. It could be used at level 15 and was renowned as the strongest accessory for characters below level 40. Rumors had it that the young guild leader of the Dynasty Guild was aiming to enter the Xiejing Academy, so he was determined to obtain this equipment. With an understanding of the situation, Lin smiled slightly and walked towards the entrance of the dungeon. He didn't care about the Dynasty Guild. They were just obstacles to his leveling progress. The people who were previously protesting suddenly stopped and looked at Lin with a skeletal warrior by his side. Lin proceeded towards the dungeon entrance, the sound of bones cracking accompanying their steps. The professional became extremely nervous and tried to pull Lin back. The professional urged, his voice filled with concern. The mage representing the Dynasty Guild stared coldly at Lin. Behind him, several members of the guild focused their gaze on Lin. They were all above level 20. Knights, warriors, mages, archers, and support classes were among their ranks. Moreover, their equipment was exceptional, ranging from weapons to armor and accessories, all of them bronze grade. Lin stood in front of the mage and calmly said, "Move out of the way!" The Dynasty Guild's mage treated his words as if he had heard the most amusing joke. Lin continued, "Don't stop me from entering the dungeon or I'll kill you." Lin spoke coldly. He wasn't joking at all. The mage smirked, casting a detection spell that confirmed Lin's insignificance as a mere level 12 nobody. While unfamiliar with the Necromancer class, the mage remained resolute in dismissing Lin's threat due to his low level. Despite warnings advising Lin to withdraw, he disregarded them entirely. Cold determination laced his final words. "Step aside, or face the consequences." A chilling sensation enveloped the mage at Lin's words, sending an involuntary shiver down his spine. Lin's gaze held an inexplicable intensity that unnerved him, questioning how a level 12 could evoke such fear. Momentarily stunned, the mage swiftly raised his staff in a menacing gesture, poised to strike Lin down should he advance. Observing the mage, Lin's lips twitched slightly. With a single casual command, his skeletal warriors darted forward with lightning speed. In an instant, one of them stood before the mage, ready to attack. The mage, sporting a smirk, conjured a faint pink energy shield. As the skeletal warrior's blade struck the shield, it distorted severely, nearly on the brink of collapse. The mage's face paled in that moment, bewildered by the power of this summoned creature. Lin instructed the skeletal warrior to employ its skill, causing its blade to emit a brilliant red light. Rampage strike. The mage, deeply rattled, hadn't anticipated such potency from this summoned being. He sensed the imminent threat of death. The impending strike not only promised to shatter his energy shield, but also ensured his demise. In a panic, he activated his skill. Resist, Flame Ring, in a split second. The flame ring erupted, pushing the skeletal warrior several meters away. The members behind him were also astonished. The mage shouted, "What are you all waiting for? Attack!" The mage felt like he had just narrowly escaped death. His face turned pale and he shouted loudly. A knight responded to his call, activating a charge skill. Holding up his shield, he charged forward and forcefully collided with the skeletal warrior. covering a distance of over 10 meters. To everyone's surprise, the knight let out a girly scream. Among the screams, the knight was sent flying. The skeletal warrior remained unmoved. In terms of strength, the skeletal warrior was clearly superior. It charged forward once again, faithfully carrying out Lin's command. The mage quickly retreated, instructing his companions to kill Lin. The best way to deal with a summoner was not to kill the summoned creature, but to eliminate the summoner themselves. As long as the summoner died, the summoned creature would naturally disappear. Two archers simultaneously released their arrows. Several arrows flew towards Lin, yet he didn't dodge or flinch. His expression remained unchanged. A dark vortex materialized before Lin, and two skeletal fighters simultaneously rose up, flawlessly blocking the oncoming arrows, one on the left and one on the right. The arrows struck the skeletal warrior's weapons with a metallic ringing, but did no damage. The two archers hastily pulled back, shocked that Lin had summoned more than one creature. The mage loudly shouted, and all the knights and fighters rushed to stand before him, shielding him from the skeletal warriors. With no immediate threat, the mage lifted his staff and targeted Lin, rapidly chanting a spell. An enormous flame burst from the ground. Seconds later, a fire serpent erupted from his staff, barreling directly toward Lin. This was a rare ability only a level 20 mage could learn, considered the strongest for that level. Some behind Lin worried for him. However, Lin stayed composed and still. Another vortex materialized before him. This time, dozens of skeletal warriors emerged, and the fire serpent exploded thunderously among them. A brilliant blaze erupted amidst the flames. Dozens of skeletal warriors charged forward, pouncing at the Dynasty Guild members. The mage's face turned incredibly grim. The appearance of 3 skeletal warriors earlier had surprised him, but he never anticipated so many materializing at once. The number of skeletal warriors now exceeded their own. The mage was highly experienced, yet he remained calm and composed, commanding the members of the guild. He had them form a formation to face the legion of skeletal warriors. Undoubtedly, the Dynasty Guild was truly a guild tempered through countless battles and enriched by experience. Each of their veterans had undergone extensive combat training and, with their outstanding teamwork, they swiftly assembled ready for action. At the forefront stood the knights, while warriors, archers, and mages took the center for maximum damage output. The support members remained at the back, swiftly bestowing buffs upon their comrades, strength boosts, agility increases, and mental fortification. Their speed surged, energy shields activated, and berserk mode turned on. Not a single buff was omitted. Every possible status enhancement was applied. Confidence returned to the mage's face. At this point, Lin raised his hand, ordering the onlookers to step back. Now, no one dared defy his words. Who could have imagined he alone would confront a dozen Dynasty Guild members? Everyone immediately stepped back, creating considerable distance. The mage suddenly spotted a flash of purple flames before witnessing a tragic scene. A skilled archer screamed. The archer's life rapidly plummeted, on the brink of death instantly. Swiftly, a healing spell hit the archer but failed to save him. To everyone's horror, the archer was dead, struck down in an instant. The mage's loud commands made the whole team grow even tenser. With dozens of skeleton warriors charging at them, even the valiant knight was now overwhelmed. He had to endure the attacks of over 10 skeleton warriors at once, activating his limitless defense. He was continuously bombarded by the skeleton warriors' rampage strikes. Though healing spells rained upon him, he still felt unbearable pain, fearing he might fall at any moment. One healing spell followed another, yet under the relentless assault, the radiance of his limitless defense rapidly waned. Just as the knight's defense dissipated, Lin unleashed the soul flame once more. The soul flame flew toward the knight, causing him to wail in agony. Over 10 rampage strikes struck the knight simultaneously. Even the support healer couldn't keep up. And in an instant, the knight was slain. The tank was down, leaving a gaping hole in their defense. The mage's face turned pale and he shouted, "Retreat!" He quickly darted backward, but Lin shook his head. It was too late. One of the skeleton warriors hurled the knight's lifeless body into the air. The body exploded with a deafening blast. A thunderous roar erupted. The knight's body detonated and the Manga heard only a resounding boom before there was nothing more. Complete annihilation. The bursting corpses sounded like world-shattering thunder, obliterating everything in its wake. On the ground, only a dozen mangled corpses remained. Not a single dynasty guild member survived. Countless items were scattered on the ground. Lin paid no attention, whipping the blood from his face before collecting everything. He used Corpse Explosion again, this time leaving no trace or remains of the Dynasty Guild members. After completing these tasks, he finally entered the dungeon. The group of freelancers who had protested earlier finally dared approach. They could hardly believe a single person had wiped out the entire Dynasty Guild team. The onlookers knew the Dynasty Guild wouldn't take this lying down, and were uncertain what to do next. One suggested they depart immediately from Western Sea City and the province, far from the Dynasty Guild's influence. His proposal was immediately accepted by all. With his urging, everyone began retreating, and the dungeon entrance swiftly became devoid of people. Half an hour later, several individuals teleported from the dungeon. A blonde man bore a hint of disappointment. Despite entering, they still couldn't obtain the Goblin King's crystal core. Suddenly, a female adventurer beside him noticed not a single person nearby, not even their own members or freelancers. They couldn't fathom what had transpired. The few individuals who accompanied Hao Ran, the son of the guild leader on this dungeon run, looked panicked. Being only at level 17, their experience paled in comparison to the mage and the others guarding the entrance. At this moment, they could only rely on Hao Ran as their backbone. After all, he was the young guild leader of the Dynasty Guild. After contemplating for a while, he finally spoke. Deploy the signal flare, hoping to get a response from the mage and the others. However, in his mind, he couldn't understand why there was no sign of battle or any traces left. One signal flare soared into the sky, bursting open to form a massive ball of light. Hao Ran realized that something must have happened to the mage and the others during the time he was inside the dungeon. He instructed everyone to follow him and leave first, as there might be danger in this area. Alone in the dungeon, Lin commanded 64 skeleton warriors, relentlessly charging forward, employing the same strategy as before, swiftly gaining experience. This time, the efficiency was even higher than the previous one. And after merely an hour, Lin had reached the end of the dungeon. The 64 skeleton warriors surrounded the Goblin King, bombarding him relentlessly. In just 30 seconds, the formidable nightmare-level boss fell to the ground in utter frustration, defeating the Goblin King experience plus 4,000, obtained a bronze-level weapon, the Goblin King's spellbook, and a low-level monster crystal core. Lin checked the properties of the Goblin King's spellbook. Goblin King's spellbook, bronze level, plus 10 spirit, plus 10 health, 3 increase in mage skills power. Looking at the attributes, while it wasn't perfect, it would do for now. Holding the book, it seemed to have some value. In the process of slaying the Goblin King, Lin reached level 13. He quickly calculated that if he wanted to reach level 15, he would need to go through approximately 3 more dungeons. However, time was running short, and he could only do a maximum of 5 dungeon runs at most. He could reach level 16, which was still slightly lower than his initial expectations, but level 16 would be sufficient for the entrance exam at Xiajing Academy. Lin exited the dungeon. Outside the dungeon, it was eerily quiet, unusually peaceful. Lin pondered for a moment and essentially understood the cause and effect of what had happened. Leaving was probably the best choice for those freelancers. Surveying his surroundings, he didn't linger either. While waiting for the dungeon to cool down, the next day another team finally arrived at the entrance of the dungeon. Xiao Sui had also reached level 10, and the skeleton warriors around Lin were quite conspicuous. She was well aware that Lin was the only one in the world with such summons. Xiao Sui looked at Lin and understood that he's going to solo it. She had just reached level 10 today and came straight to the dungeon. She never expected that Lin would be able to solo it once again. Lin was one step faster than her. In the nightmare level dungeon, Lin plowed through the enemies. Now in Legion of 72, skeleton warriors had been assembled. Just 45 minutes later, Lin encountered an old friend, the Goblin King, who woke up on the great swords of the skeleton warriors. By the time it stood up, more than half of its health was already depleted. Flames erupted from its mouth but was interrupted by the soul flame, interrupting its skills. In just 30 seconds, the Goblin King once again fell in utter frustration. After defeating the Goblin King, gained experience 40,000, and the loot dropped as before. Lin glanced at the items and stored them in his storage space. The Goblin King's eyes carried a mixture of unwillingness and frustration. That gaze seemed to suggest that it recognized Lin. Lin waved his hand, indicating that it didn't matter who killed him. At least Lin gave him a quick death. In truth, he said, he didn't want to kill the Goblin King either, but there was no other way. He needed to level up. Lin softly spoke to the Goblin King, regardless of whether it understood or not. Another 12 hours passed, and Lin returned once again to see his old friend. After slaying the Goblin King, Lin also reached level 14, and the number of skeleton warriors increased to 76. While waiting outside the dungeon for the cooldown, he encountered an old classmate. Hearing a familiar voice, he opened his eyes and saw Xiaoxu. Dust smudged her delicate face, and she had injuries, clearly having just experienced a battle. As she had just come out of the dungeon, she stared at Lin, her face full of dissatisfaction. She asked him what level he was, and Lin calmly replied that he was level 14. Xiaoxue couldn't believe it. How could Lin have leveled up so quickly? She had teamed up with others and repeatedly cleared the Western Sea Mine dungeon on normal difficulty twice, and it took her from level 10 to 11. Back-to-back dungeons had left her completely exhausted. She knew Lin could solo dungeons, but he couldn't possibly level up this fast. Xiaoxue couldn't have imagined that Lin was running nightmare-level dungeons. Her sense of dissatisfaction towards him only grew stronger. She huffed. "I won't admit defeat." Saying so, she turned and left. Lin watched her, not knowing what to say. Suddenly he saw Xiaoxue and a few others enter the dungeon. Lin witnessed something incredible. Dungeons had cooldown periods, but Xiaoxue had just come out. How could she go back in so quickly? He had tried both normal and nightmare difficulties, and dungeons always had cooldowns, yet Xiaoxue could re-enter repeatedly. An hour later, she completed another dungeon run. After coming out of the dungeon, Xiaoxue didn't forget to glance back at Lin. He could see her exhaustion from her expression, the kind of fatigue that resulted from continuous battles. Shortly after, in just a little over 10 minutes, Xiaoxu found another team and went into the dungeon again. Half an hour later, exhausted, she exited from the dungeon. She was so tired that she didn't even want to move a finger. Xiaoxue, with her weariness, sat down beside Lin. Lin asked her why she was pushing herself so hard, and Xiaoxue replied with annoyance. She can't believe that Lin has the nerve to ask her why. For years, she is always second behind Lin. She must surpass Lin. Lin never expected Xiaoxue to harbor such deep resentment. If he had known, he would have given her an easy time during a certain exam, and let her achieve first place too. Xiaoxu looked up at the sky. She also wanted to get into Xiajing Academy. Level 15 would be secure, but level 16 would guarantee her admission. Lin recommended she run nightmare dungeons to level up faster. Xiaoxue stared at Lin with her big eyes, thinking he was joking or perhaps teasing her. Nightmare dungeons required elite teams, and those people were all level 16 or 17, professionals. Nobody would take a level 12 like her. Xiaoxue gave Lin a disdainful look, as if saying, "Do you even understand anything at all?" Hearing Lin's silence, Xiaoxue continued, "That's why I should run several more normal dungeons. I should be able to get to level 14, and with some effort, level 15 might be possible." Finally, Lin spoke up, asking how Xiaoxue was able to bypass the dungeon cooldown. Xiaoxue made a surprised Pikachu face, not expecting there were things Lin didn't know. Lin didn't speak, only silently watching Xiaoxue for her answer, seeming amused. Xiaoxue had a mischievous grin, teasing Lin to say something nice. Then she would tell him. Lin turned his head away, closing his eyes. Seeing this, she pouted, showing him her cooldown amulet. Lin quickly recalled this item was not taught in school. Xiaoxue said the cooldown amulet could offset the dungeon cooldown, allowing repeated entry. The amulet looked like a stopwatch under detection spells. Lin obtained the item info. Primary. Cooldown amulet. Available usage. 7/10. Introduction. This item can offset dungeon cooldown below level 20. This was the first time Lin had heard of this item. Lin asked if it was expensive. Xiaoxue didn't know since it was from her father, but remembered his expression. He seemed a bit distressed giving it to her. Xiaoxue's family was very wealthy, with many successful companies under their name, well known in Western Sea City. If someone like her father considered something expensive, the item was obviously valuable. Xiao Xue scratched her hair. She had to use up all 7 dungeon reset chances within 2 days, and felt she might be exhausted to death. Seeing her troubled expression, Lin thought for a moment, offering to carry her through the dungeon. He guaranteed Xiao Xue could reach level 15 without lifting a finger. Xiao Xue suddenly remembered this stern guy beside her could solo dungeons. Xiao Xue quickly decided, willing to share the amulet with him. Lin knew even though the experience per run would be less, the increased entries would result in greater overall gain. It was a win-win, and Xiao Xue happily agreed. Lin told Xiao Xue to rest first, and they would start in 2 hours. Xiao Xue stretched lazily, preparing to nap. She quickly drifted off within moments. Sleeping so defenselessly in the wilderness was dangerous. However, Xiao Xue slept peacefully because Lin was beside her. Xiao Xue curled up, sleeping soundly like a kitten, a small smile at the corner of her mouth. 2 hours later, Lin's cooldown ended. Xiao Xue awoke, stretching languidly, accompanying Lin with a skeletal warrior. Xiao Xue used the amulet, removing her cooldown. Lin started the dungeon, then selected Nightmare difficulty. Xiao Xue's face changed drastically, thinking Lin had chosen wrong. Before she could speak, they had disappeared at the entrance. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere made it hard for Xiao Xue to breathe. She clung tightly to Lin, staring at him in fear. Lin turned his head back to look at her, asking if she was scared. Bracing herself, Xiao Xue declared she wasn't scared, but just looking at the terrifying attributes of the monsters made her teeth chatter. Lin told her that all she had to do was follow him. A large number of skeleton warriors appeared in the room. An unwillingness rose in her heart, and she quickly caught up with Lin. They ran through the long mine tunnel, seeing the Mine Wolf King boss, the Nightmare level. Wolf King was twice larger than the normal level. Wolf King, a skeleton warrior slain a nearby elite monster, and then threw the elite monster's corpse into the air toward the Wolf King. At the same time, Lin also raised his hand. Corpse explosion. A huge explosion rang out, and the terrifying sound startled Xiao Xue. Experience rapidly increased, and a swarm of notifications surged in. Several more loud explosions followed. The Wolf King, who was unimaginably terrifying in her eyes, fell to the ground with a howl. The Wolf King that would usually take a team of 20 minutes to kill had been vanquished instantly. Within less than a second, she then realized that this was not a normal level, but a Nightmare-level dungeon. When Xiao Xue learned that Lin had started soloing Nightmare-level dungeons from level 10, she finally understood why Lin could level up so quickly. From the moment they entered the dungeon till now, it had only been around 10 minutes, and they were already about to face the final boss. The enormous Goblin King stood before them. Then, the skeleton warriors charged up like bears to a beehive, swarming the Goblin King with a dozen ear-splitting sounds. Everything returned to calm. A level-up glow appeared around Lin. He leveled up to 15. Xiao Xue, looking at the item drops, felt it was a shame there wasn't a staff. Hearing this, suddenly a black shadow flew towards her. Xiao Xue instinctively reached out and caught it. Lin handed the Goblin King's staff to Xiao Xue. Seeing Lin hadn't used any weapons from start to finish, Xiao Xue knew he didn't care about attributes from these bronze-level gears. Lin didn't know Xiao Xue's thoughts. He was checking his attribute changes after leveling up. He quickly calculated reaching level 16 after 5 more runs. Looking at the Goblin King lying on the ground, he touched it and apologized, saying he would kill it 5 more times. Seeing Lin actually talking to it, Xiao Xue found it very strange. The boss obviously couldn't understand him. For some reason, Xiao Xue thought of Lin apologizing to the boss, and suddenly found his actions somewhat endearing and cute. Upon leaving, Xiao Xue immediately used the charm. Only a dozen seconds later, they re-entered the Nightmare Western Sea Mine. The second time, Xiao Xue seemed a completely different person. As she ran with Lin, she was in a state of excitement. Her overflowing excitement on her face made Lin feel a bit strange. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th times quickly passed, using up all the entries. Xiao Xue successfully reached level 14. There was still a day and a half before the exam. They could run it 2 more times, and by then, she definitely hit 15. Xiao Xue temporarily lost her competitive mindset toward Lin. She knew that they could definitely enter the Shijing Academy together. Xiao Sui suddenly asked if Lin was interested in competing for the top position in the province. Xiao Sui explained that if Lin could become the top place in the province, he could earn a lot of points. Most importantly, there was an opportunity for Lin to join the Creator Academy, which is the strongest and most prestigious academy within the empire. The Creator Academy exclusively recruits only the top-ranking prodigies from the Xiajing Academy, which itself recruits talented prodigies. Xiao Shui looked at Lin with her brilliant eyes, genuinely believing that he had a good chance of qualifying for the Creator Academy. Lin spoke softly, firmly determined to attend the Xiajing Academy first, where his sister was studying. If given the opportunity in the future, he would also attempt to enter the prestigious Creator Academy at a later date. Suddenly, Xiao Xui noticed a blonde young man, Gao Yang, standing behind Lin at the entrance of the dungeon. Gao Yang appeared to be looking for a team to join. Although already at level 11, Gao Yang was having no luck finding a group that could handle the monsters in the dungeon at that level. As expected, after an unsuccessful search, Gao Yang looked visibly disappointed. Lin was ready to partner with Gao Yang to grind the dungeon together. Xiao Shui chuckled amusedly and followed along. In an office, a stout middle-aged man was angrily shouting at and scolding his son for having the audacity to block the dungeons, preventing others from being able to join. He blamed his son for breaking rules set by both the Empire and the Profession Association by doing this. After rubbing his brow in frustration, the father, who was a guild president, instructed his contrite son to stay at home for the next few days and wait for the final exam. When his son asked about some missing guild members, the guild president replied that he had already sent people to investigate. The president sneered, aware that someone likely dared to challenge his dynasty guild for control in front of the dungeon. Xiao Shui called Gao Yang over. Gao Yang's eyes were rolling rapidly, revealing a profound and meaningful smile. Xiao Shui's fiery tsundere personality was well known, toned down only somewhat when she was around Lin. She raised her fist and made a threatening gesture at Gao Yang. Gao Yang was startled, saying he was just joking. Xiao Shui told him to follow them to grind the dungeon together. An excited howl clasped his hands together and thanked them both. Expressions and actions were extremely exaggerated. Xiao Shu clenched her fist tightly and threatened Gao Yang that if he continued behaving in this silly manner, she would refuse to team up with him anymore. Gao Yang immediately became serious and surrendered on the spot, but seeing his dramatic reaction simply made Xiao Xue even more irritated and wanting to punch him. Xiao Xu angrily snorted, and a fireball appeared in the palm of her hand as she told him he better start acting naturally, or she would definitely throw this fireball directly at his face without hesitation. When Gao Yang learned that the two of them currently had a 10-hour cooldown period after running the dungeon, he then wisely decided to go grind some wild monsters nearby and let the two of them rest up. But before leaving the scene, he winked at Lin in a cheeky manner, essentially cheering Lin on to make a bold, romantic move on Xiao Shui tonight since they would be alone. And then Gao Yang immediately proceeded to run off from the area as fast as he possibly could. Xiao Shui angrily stomped her foot on the ground when she witnessed what Gao Yang did, and she aggressively threw her fireball at the fleeing Gao Yang. The fireball itself landed on the ground, but the resulting sparks managed to catch on Gao Yang's retreating figure, and he cried out loudly in pain, frantically covering his burnt backside as he disappeared from view in the blink of an eye. Precisely 10 hours later, after letting them fully rest, Gao Yang rejoined their team, and the trio entered the nightmare-level dungeon once again. As soon as he set foot into this dungeon, Gao Yang instantly became the first one to be overwhelmed by fear, getting scared and paralyzed on the ground, just like Xiao Shui had been during her first initial experience. Gao Yang truly thought that Lin must have somehow selected the completely wrong difficulty level by mistake. Xiao Shui angrily snorted at Gao Yang's fearful reaction and curtly told him to stop talking nonsense and to simply follow their lead through the dungeon. As they proceeded further inside, Gao Yang displayed a wide variety of facial expressions, including emotions like profound puzzlement, outright panic, and unconditioned fear. 10 minutes later, Gao Yang was still gaping at the sight of the dead boss. He wiped the corner of his mouth and suddenly hugged Lin's thigh, saying that he wanted Lin to carry him every day, and he could dress up in skirts and cheerleader outfits to cheer Lin on. Xiaoxue helplessly remarked that Gao Yang had no backbone and lacked the spirit of a knight. Gao Yang bluntly stated that he did not care about any of that in the slightest, with Lin's amazingly powerful presence alone. Who seriously needs to bother being an actual knight anymore? Lin slowly shook his head upon hearing Gao Yang's devoted offer and remarks, and mentally calculated that after successfully completing just one more full run of this dungeon, he himself would definitely reach level 16. At the same time, Xiaoxue would likewise reach level 15, and Gao Yang would reach level 12 after this additional run. As for Gao Yang himself, Lin knew that Gao Yang wasn't actively planning to enroll at the incredibly competitive Xiaojing Academy like Lin hoped to attend. No. Gao Yang's personal goal was to gain admission at another prominent higher-level academy located in their province that, while still a good school, was not considered to be nearly as intensely competitive compared to the Xiejing Academy in terms of admission standards. As the setting sun cast long shadows, several principals stood on Western Sea City's southern wall, gazing at the wilderness beyond. Tomorrow was the final exam, and they wondered how the students would fare. One elderly principal asked Principal Lu about two prodigies from his school, questioning if they too prepared for the prestigious Xiajing Academy. Principal Lu stared silently into the distance and nodded, aware of Xiajing Academy's intense competition. By previous standards, only level 15 students had a decent admission chance, while level 16 could guarantee it. He sighed, recalling over the years, only two city students, Su Qianxing and Lin's sister, ever reached level 16 pre-exam. He wondered if any students this year could match that feat. Soon, examined by detection spells, a level 12 gladiator came into view, followed by Bright, a level 13 archer. As night fell and students trickled back, Principal Lu grew anxious since Xiaoxue, Lin, and Gao Yang hadn't yet returned. Finally, just before darkness set in, he spotted three figures approaching and smiled, simply relieved they were safe. Detection spells revealed Gao Yang was level 12, Xiaoxue impressively level 15, startling the principals. Lastly, Lin was level 16, one level higher than Xiaoxue, causing all principals to gasp in astonishment. Seeing their equipment, the principals realized they had cleared many dungeons. Principal Lu was delighted and let the three of them get on the bus first, and he was in a great mood. After all of the students had returned, he had won out in front of the other principals. Moreover, perhaps this time both Lin and Xiaoxue could be admitted to Xiajing Academy, which would be an extremely honorable achievement for Western Sea City and the high school. As night fell, Lin continued his meditation. He followed his own thoughts and didn't place too much emphasis on the final exam. He was confident he would definitely get into Xiajing Academy. If he had a chance, he would also try to strive for the top spot in the province. The next morning, Lin woke up on time. Exactly 100 skeleton warriors were quietly waiting in the summoning space. Arriving at the school, many classmates had already arrived. Gao Yang waved vigorously at Lin, and after a while, Xiaoxue also arrived. Xiaoxue was much more popular than Lin, and the students flocked around her. But contrary to her usual demeanor, Xiaoxue came over to Lin and asked him how he was feeling. Lin nodded slightly in response. Xiaoxue smiled and hoped to see Lin at Xiajing Academy. After everyone had arrived, Principal Lu came over and gave each person a teleportation stone. The teleportation stone would take everyone to the exam site. Principal Lu once again reminded the students to pay attention to their safety. The students activated their teleportation stones one by one, and with a stream of light, each person disappeared. The exam site was extremely spacious, like a huge square. There were probably tens of thousands of people. The light of teleportation never stopped. The examinees from Western Sea City were all distributed in the same area. Under the gaze of everyone, a towering gate descended from the sky. The trial tower was activated, and a solemn voice resounded across the entire square. It started explaining the exam rules. The stern voice wouldn't let students speak or ask questions. Violators would be directly disqualified from the exam. A few were whispering. Amidst the hushed atmosphere within the trial tower, sudden rays of light emanated and enveloped a select few students, causing their instantaneous disappearance. An immediate hush fell over the venue as someone reflexively covered their mouth, a testament to the stringent regulations in place. Silence pervaded the space so profoundly that the faintest pin drop could be heard. Even breaths became cautious and deliberate. It was in this tense stillness that the stern voice resonated once more. The trial tower, known for tailoring exams to different professions, catered specific evaluations for combat-oriented and support professions. Upon passing the foundational assessment, each profession gained the privilege to select their difficulty level. Diverse difficulties yielded varying outcomes and points, permitting only personal equipment for use, as per the regulations expounded by the stern voice. One after another, everyone queued up for entry into the trial tower. Lin seamlessly merged with the crowd, entering the tower's domain. Positioned atop the tower were several authoritative figures, tasked as this year's final examiners for the province. Notably, upon noticing the rare profession of a necromancer, the examiner in charge was readying to deploy monsters 2 levels higher than Lin, adhering strictly to the guidelines for rare mages. A peculiar monster materialized before Lin, a creature donning a wolf's head, adorned in robes and wielding a magic wand. Lin's attempts at using detection spells proved futile, with minimal information besides the monster's name revealed. As a countdown materialized on the screen, Lin readied themselves. With a swift motion of Lin's left hand, the soul flame descended upon the wolf beastman mage's head, resulting in an immediate, resounding defeat. At the tower's summit, the examiners stood aghast, rendered speechless by Lin's lightning-fast victory, achieved in a mere 0.1 seconds. In the surveillance room, situated atop the trial tower, several examiners wore expressions of sheer amazement. At that moment, a robed elderly figure, Elder Ning, made his entrance into the room, prompting immediate reverence from the examiners. Elder Ning, having heard about a unique profession, sought to witness it firsthand. Displayed on the screen was live footage of Lin. The examiners swiftly recounted the recent events and were deliberating on escalating the difficulty level, intending to initiate a second test under legendary difficulty. However, one of the examiners voiced concern, feeling that such an escalation might not be fair to Lin. Elder Ning chuckled softly, remarking, "In the past, we've witnessed professionals who dispatched monsters with similar swiftness. For this initial test, Lin will be acknowledged as the top scorer, awarded an initial 100 points. Should Lin conquer the second test, an additional 1,000 points shall be bestowed upon him." With unwavering determination, Elder Ning expressed his willingness to provide these points personally. After a brief pause, another monstrous apparition materialized before Lin. Once again, the announcer directed Lin to brace for the second trial. The task was straightforward: vanquish the presented foe. Despite this being the subsequent phase, Lin perceived it as standard protocol for the trial, finding nothing peculiar. As the countdown reached its culmination, Lin unleashed the soul flame once more. The mage-like monster emitted a chilling scream before meeting instantaneous obliteration, yet another swift elimination. All examiners turned their attention towards Elder Ning in unison. His serene smile signaled them to proceed with the second phase of examination. With the conclusion of the initial test, the authoritative voice resonated, disclosing that out of the vast multitude of combat class students, only half had surpassed the initial hurdle. The scores were proclaimed, and Lin unquestionably held the top position. Following Lin, Mei secured the second spot, while Xiao Xue claimed the third. Wang, a member of the Dynasty Guild, clinched the fourth position with a time of 5.5 seconds. Wang's indignation peaked upon witnessing his placement outside the top 3. Observing Lin's astonishing 0.1 second accomplishment, he was convinced of a system error. The resounding voice resumed, heralding the commencement of the second phase of examination. Emphasis was placed on the potential hazards of this round, cautioning candidates of possible casualties and encouraging prudent self-assessment. Participants were granted the liberty to withdraw if faced with overwhelming peril during the test. The second phase was structured akin to a dungeon expedition, segmented into 3 difficulty tiers: normal, nightmare, and hell, each offering distinct points. Lin swiftly discerned that the objective of this phase was to ascertain the individual who could dispatch the most monsters within a 30-minute time frame. Wang didn't hesitate. He picked the hell difficulty, thinking that defeating 1 monster in hell was worth 5 in the normal level. He revealed himself as a berserker and readied his weapon. Xiao Xue, an elemental mage preferring ranged combat, opted for the normal difficulty, aiming for quantity over tough battles. In the surveillance room, examiners discussed each candidate's choices. Mei, a shadow hunter and the second-ranking candidate, also chose hell difficulty. Most notable candidates had made their selections, leaving only Lin. All examiners awaited Lin's decision and performance eagerly. Upon hearing the rules, Lin assessed the trial as a test of endurance. While most would struggle in continuous combat for 30 minutes, Lin felt differently. He went for the hell difficulty. Outside, all provincial school principals observed. Principal Lu seemed delighted after witnessing Lin's performance, attracting envious gazes. As the candidates made their choices and the countdown ended, the second phase began. Lin was instantly transported to a different space. An armored beast, an elite orc warrior, emerged, roaring furiously. Lin, unimpressed by its weak stats, summoned 2 powerful skeletal warriors. They swiftly defeated the orc warrior in under a second. With a 5-second gap between each monster, the monitoring examiners were astonished. Lin's summoned creatures proved immensely powerful, and he controlled 2 of them. Witnessing repeated instant kills, the examiners grew desensitized. Monsters spawned and perished rapidly. Losing interest, they turned their attention to other participants. Wang, with redness in his eyes, activated his berserk mode, swung his massive sword non-stop. Xiaosui held her staff, casting large fireball spells. Turning attention back to Lin, he was seen comfortably settled in a corner, eating a sweet potato, which he pulled out from his pocket. Some examiners noted this down, while others eyed Lin's sweet potato, feeling a pang of hunger. Elder Ning had been silent since the beginning of this round, watching Lin intently. He was deeply intrigued by Lin. As the 30 minutes quickly elapsed and the test concluded, Wang, panting heavily, slumped to the ground. He had defeated 50 monsters and believed he was in the lead. After half of the participants were eliminated in the first round, another half dropped out in the second round, either due to failure or voluntary withdrawal. Eagerly awaiting the results, Wang's anticipation peaked when the scores were announced. To his astonishment, he ranked 4th once again, while Lin had scored a staggering 1605 points. Jumping to his feet, he quickly calculated in his head. In the hell difficulty, each monster was worth 5 points. So, the maximum points one could earn in a minute was 60, making the limit for 30 minutes 1800 points. With a score like Lin's, it meant he had killed 301 monsters, and he would have killed all of the monsters instantly. This was impossible. Outside the examination hall, Principal Lu trembled uncontrollably, his cup quaking in his hand, spilling its contents. Even in the past, where the 2 prodigies from their province, Su Qianxing and Lin Mohan, had only scored 700 and 650 points respectively, Principal Lu was at a loss for words. Soon, the 3rd round of the examination began. This time, the candidates would face a boss-level monster. There were also 3 levels of difficulty. Without giving it a second thought, Lin opted for the hell difficulty. He was up against the boss-level orc captain. Observing the monster's stats, Lin felt it was somewhat underwhelming, even though it was the hell difficulty. The boss seemed to have been significantly weakened. He also realized that it would be unlikely for the examination to present a genuine hell-level boss, as it would inevitably lead to student casualties. The same location, the same format, but a different opponent. Lin once again summoned 2 skeletal warriors, feeling a tinge of disappointment. He found the test too simple. Wang engaged the boss head-on, recklessly clashing with it. Xiao Xue, on the other hand, continuously dodged the orc captain's attacks while retaliating with her fireball. Mei utilized a stealth ability, positioning herself behind the boss, waiting for the right moment to strike. Back to Lin, his 2 skeletal warriors unleashed a rampage strike. Their weapons glowed red, and with a strike from each, they finished off the boss with ease. The examiners engaged in discussion, realizing they still hadn't gauged Lin's true strength. They could only wait for the 5th round of tests. Some believed that the 5th round would surely reveal his genuine capabilities. Listening to the examiners' discussions, Elder Ning simply kept stroking his beard, with most of his attention focused on Lin. The results were once again displayed. Unsurprisingly, Lin remained in the top position. That's it for the video. See you in the next part.